Greetings, dear listeners. Today we have a return guest, Jordan Castro. Jordan is a writer and the deputy director of the Cluny Project, a sort of think tank for cultural entrepreneurs based in Washington, D.C. The first time Jordan came on our podcast, it was to talk about his first novel, which was titled The Novelist. That book covers a few hours in the life of a blocked writer as he goes about his day, struggles to get to work, dodges internet distraction, goes to the bathroom, and walks his dog. It may sound boring when we describe it, but it connected with a lot of readers who felt not only that the book was hilarious, which it really is, but that it reflected their reality, the reality of life as a constant struggle against the internet. The book was a success. Now, Jordan is back to talk about his second novel, which is titled Muscle Man. It deals with the life of a disgruntled middle-aged academic who tries to find an answer to his frustrations in weightlifting. It's a hilarious satire of our time, a novel that speaks to our political moment without being political art per se. Before we get started, a reminder to head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and consider becoming a paid subscriber if you're not one yet. You'll get access to, among other things, the whole conversation with Jordan, along with other subscriber-only benefits. And don't forget to give us a like and a review on your favorite podcast app. With all that out of the way, on to the show.
We have a treat for listeners and viewers today because we don't usually have a novelist on, much less so an acclaimed novelist. But we have Jordan Castro, whose second novel just came out. It's called Muscle Man. I actually have my own special copy right here. For those of you who are watching, this is what it looks like. It's a wonderful cover. His first novel was called The Novelist. It came out 2 years ago, Jordan?
I think in 2022, although I'm really bad with dates.
Okay.
2022, I think, yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll take your word for it. 2022. And
It's easily Googleable.
yes, indeed. And we actually had Jordan on to talk about that novel last year, and we'll include a link in the show notes if you guys like this episode so much and you want more Jordan. We'll have another hour and a half of him in that previous episode. That was a really good one, too. So I want to start with a sort of general scene-setting question. I think it's always interesting to talk to a novelist about his or her novel because we, as the reader, the outsider, the observer, we're interpreting your fictional work in a particular way. We are reading into it. We're coming to our own conclusions. We're wondering to ourselves, wait, is the main character in this similar to the actual author? Is Jordan Castro writing something autobiographical here? So there's all these questions that come to mind from me and from the outsider. But when you wrote it, you had your own intentions and your own vision, one that maybe doesn't bear as much resemblance to our interpretation. So maybe before I start to interpret on your behalf and, speculate about what you were trying to do, maybe you tell us what this novel meant to you and what you were trying to accomplish with it, to the extent that one tries to accomplish something with a novel in the first place.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me, first of all. Before this novel came out, I had resolved not to do exactly what you're asking me to do, which was I'd resolved sort of not to explain myself. In part because I noticed that for the first novel, I would say certain things about what I thought about the novel, and then reviews and people talking about it would just parrot what I said. And I think that this novel sort of lends itself to multiple readings, and I like that. Um, one of the I remember being in school, and um, it was very sort of unfashionable to sort of ask, or not even ask, but to sort of even wonder what the author meant about something. And I also think that that's sort of an extreme in the other way. But I guess what did it mean to me? Well, let's start with you. Actually, I'd like to hear your I'd like to hear your thing.
Yeah. So as I think I told you before, Jordan, I I found the book to be, I think as I put it last time, subtly reactionary in the most pleasant way possible. I think there is something right coded about this novel. And maybe that's just because it's about partly about weightlifting. It's about what it means to be a man. Maybe it's about, oh, it's about a man. It's about a man who goes to the gym. So inevitably, there's going to be this aspect of the young male and masculinity, and is masculinity in crisis? Is the young male lonely? So there's definitely that part of it, which I think is interesting and we'll probably unpack a little bit. I think that it's really about one's thoughts and in one's interior life, and how those thoughts and those obsessions can sort of dominate the mind and perhaps even the body. Because in the book we're sort of we're observing and listening to the main character, whose name is Harold. We're listening to his internal thoughts nonstop. The book takes place over the course of several hours in one day, and he is just constantly in his own mind. And so I think there's something there about how to get stuck in one's mind and how to try to unstuck one's mind. And you do that perhaps by going to the gym. But I could say more, but let me just put that out there and see how you respond to it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I thought of something actually to answer your first question as well, which is
Okay.
that I always sort of hope that the fiction that I write is smarter than I am. And in part because I don't actually start with, like you're talking about, is this novel right coded? Is it left coded? I sort of don't write fiction what I think of as like an ideological mode. I don't start with the end already in mind. And so the way that I write is by basically letting it emerge at first. And so it's not like I sat down with these ideas, like I'm going to write about masculinity in crisis, and I'm going to write about the problem of academia. And it wasn't like, okay, how do I take my ideas and translate them into fiction? It was more like, I write fiction. I have a habit of writing fiction. I normally feel some sort of mysterious sort of impulse to write. And so, maybe that in the case of this novel, it took the form of like writing rants in my notes app or on my laptop, and then, writing the beginning of a sort of gothic story, and then writing character details and so on, and then kind of like weaving them all together over the course of many years. And so it's not like I really start with the idea and then say, how do I instantiate this idea in the particular? It's more that like once a draft starts to take shape, um, I read it as if I'm a reader, and I'm like, well, what's actually happening here? Like, what are the ideas that are sort of present? What are the thematic through lines? Like, what did I do basically? And when I did that, certainly things like, loneliness popped up. Certainly things like, the relationship between the mind and the body, the sort of, all of that was kind of there. And as far as it's a political novel, I'm interested in politics, I think only insofar as they are kind of like the outer layer of something more existential or spiritual, or even like literary or philosophical. Like my concerns are not primarily political. If they were, I would write an op-ed, or I would, take tweets, or I would like, which is nothing wrong with that. It's just like, that's just not what I'm doing, And so it's present and it's certainly present in the novel. Um,
You don't think it's possible to write a political novel?
It is. No, no, it totally is. No, it totally is. Yeah, yeah. I'm just
It's
saying.
just not something that you would do, in other words.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's one of these things where it's like with people are always another sort of popular thing to say is that all art is political, and for me it's like art can be viewed politically, art can include politics, but all art shouldn't primarily be viewed through a political lens. I think that's sort of when you get into trouble. And some art should be. I think some art is political art. I tend to think, I mean, maybe this is just a quippy cop out, but people will say, if you're doing political art, you're doing politics poorly and you're doing art poorly.
Mm.
And I think there's some amount of truth in that for sure. Um, uh, and I think part of the reason, I've talked to a handful of people so far where, I'll say just for background for the listeners too, like the novel, it's sort of an anti-campus novel. It takes place in a university. We are basically in the protagonist's head for a lot of it. It's very digressive in all these different ways. Um, uh, what was I even? Well, I don't remember what I was going to say. I was giving background and then I forgot what
Yeah, I think what's striking about the main character is that.
Oh,
Oh,
I remembered. Sorry. Which
okay.
was just that I've talked to a handful of people and they're like, it's hard to pin the politics down. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that, um, in order to write a work of fiction, you have to sort of see around and through and different angles. It's not like here's the good guy, here's the bad guy, here's what I'm defending, here's what I'm scapegoating. Like that's not really what a novel is. Maybe other maybe other genres are like that, but I don't think a novel is like that.
Yeah.
What I thought was really great about it is just the way that you capture the reality of self-loathing that so many people feel. I mean, as someone who engages in occasional self-loathing, I could relate to that part. Like when you get really consumed by this endless stream of consciousness that is running in the background, this kind of low intensity hum that's like basically in our minds.
Hmm.
It's there and it's almost like a physical reality.
Hmm.
And he seems to hate himself in some ways. And I mean, so I guess I would ask you, does he hate himself? And why does he hate himself?
It's always hard to psychologize. I mean, one. I think that scenario that you're describing where there there's an almost well, actually, here we'll do this. The novel you asked at the very beginning, and it's a sort of misconception. Someone wrote this like really egregious and aggressive sort of takedown of me, where they assumed that I was like the protagonist, that the protagonist was me. They assumed this was autofiction. It's not. I should say, obviously, there are parts of me in probably every character in the book, something like that. But like, it's not. It's not just like a stand-in for me. Um, that being said, I do think sometimes it's easier instead of like psychologizing the character to like talk about my experience or at least things that I've seen, which is that my experience is often that, um, you know, when I'm too wrapped up in my head, or really when I'm too wrapped up in self, I experience it as an almost like physical sensation in the body, like a kind of like oppressive, gnawing, almost like frantic kind of feeling that is basically inarticulate. I'm not, maybe that feeling attaches itself to certain things. Okay, this thing on the internet's annoying. Okay, this person's bothering me. Okay, I'm such an idiot or something like that. It attaches itself to things, but it's mainly like a sort of mental and also physical sensation. And one of the things that I'm really interested in doing in literature is to try and render sensation. Celine, the novelist Celine, talked about aiming for truth in sensation. And I try and sort of phenomenologically kind of communicate those experiences in such a way that the reader can participate in them. And so I was definitely thinking about that. I mean, there's since the novel is a lot about the mind and the body, um, just sort of thinking about the way that, well, if my mind is the problem, maybe something sort of becoming more embodied, sort of engaging in these physical practices will help. And sometimes it does, but it's also not enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I want to dig a little bit deeper on this political question. in two ways.
You
First,
can't avoid it, Jordan. You can't hide from
well,
the politics.
I'm
Look,
gonna
I'm leaving and bobbing. Look, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
I'm gonna impose my interpretation on Jordan, and it's based on me having read both of his books and having casually glanced at his bookshelf once when I visited his office at CUA.
Shared bookshelf.
First of all, for shared with your coworkers. So I don't even know if the books that I saw were yours. But first of all, like an op-ed tries to have a policy implemented, right? A novel doesn't have that end in mind. A novel is about exploration of some sort, right? So what are you exploring? And the way I see Jordan Castro is he's an explorer of a certain kind of disturbed male or frustrated male. And I think that the fact that in real life we have a lot of frustrated males in the United States right now is one of the reasons why your books are popular, Jordan. But like the tradition that you fall into is not political novels, but it is adjacent to politics. So I think the novel that I saw on your bookshelf, which I think you told me you read 17 times, was Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky, right? Which is like
not 17 times, but a lot of times.
A lot of times, maybe more, maybe less than 17.
Less than 17. What is it? 7 times 77 is how many times I've read Underground.
And that novel is like, for those of you that haven't read it, you should read it. It's like from the 19th century Russia, from before the revolution in Russia, like right before a lot of bad things happened, violent things happened. Some people think they were good things. Most people don't. But it's about frustrated male ego, a civil servant with a crummy job who can't talk to women, who has a bruised ego, whose ego gets bruised very easily just when an aristocrat brushes against him, and he just like obsesses about that. The only woman he can talk to is a prostitute, and there is this whole like which recurs, this sort of idealization of like the good prostitute that finally loves me. It's a kind of a male fantasy. You have there a lot of the themes that are developed later, and I think the American version of this is Taxi Driver, the movie by Scorsese, which I think the writer of that movie, Paul Schrader, read also was inspired by Notes from Underground, and it's about a cab driver who is a Vietnam vet who can't sleep and just drives a cab, and eventually he meets a prostitute that he tries to save. We actually talked about this movie in the last episode. Shadi and Demir did with Jeff Schellenberger about assassinations. And I think your book is of a piece with that, except that it's just updated for our situation. It's a lot more focused on the first person of just like inside the cranium of the frustrated dude, and it covers types of men that only exist now, like the frustrated academic. Like having been a frustrated adjunct for 5 years, I can say you do capture the psyche pretty well. It was hard for me to read this book at times because I don't want to remember this time in my life. It sucked. But then your other novel about the novelist, about a guy that can't write, wants to write but can't write, is constantly checking Twitter. These are figures that didn't exist before. But the politics, where does it come in? And in Taxi Driver and in Notes from Underground, you have politics as part of the universe where this like crazy frustrated male lives in. And he mocks the politics, he rubs up against it, he fights against it. He doesn't engage with it on an actual intellectual level. He doesn't like think through. The underground man makes fun of Russian utopian politics. Or he condemns them as being like ultimately anti-human, but he doesn't actually say that much intelligent stuff about it, even though maybe he was right in the long term, right? But he's just like rubbing up. He's just these idiots. I hate everything. And the Taxi Driver too. Like he meets a sort of late 60s prototype of an idealistic liberal politician that has this sort of populist rhetoric, but is also deeply part of the establishment. And there's all these like young, creative, attractive people working for him, and he wants to be part of that, but he can't be part of that. And then he decides that he wants to assassinate this guy for no reason. Anyway, your guy is in the same world, but the politics that he's running up against with are like this weird Nietzschean like overman stuff, that he gets secondhand. I think, well, probably firsthand because he's an academic. But there's a lot of quotes in the book where he says, Casey, who's like the guy that the narrator looks up to. Casey's strength lay in the fact that he never needed anything from anyone. Everyone needed stuff from him. And that Casey was the one that taught him how to do weights, or how to lift weights. And Casey this, Casey that. Casey's like this sort of prototype of a man that's really becoming a sovereign individual like Nietzsche. And then the other politics that he runs up against is a sort of bland bureaucratic liberalism of the faculty that has all these like dumb, slogans, but they seem kind of empty. So there's like two empty ideologies that bookmark this man's world. And he's just frustrated, doesn't know what the hell to do. And it's a really tough situation. And I don't know what the answer to it is, but it's nice that somebody wrote a story about it.
Thanks. And if you can relate with that situation, go to Amazon.com or wherever you buy books and buy Muscle Man.
We should definitely emphasize that. There will be a link in the show notes. So you guys should click on that link, buy the book, order it, get it from your library. I mean, Jordan, I'll just say again, I loved it, and it's also hilarious. So we're talking about some of the dark elements, but there are so many laugh out loud moments.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just doing a bit. I'm happy to jump in and actually address what.
Well, the comedy, and just to give you more stuff to talk about, Jordan, the comedy, as you told me as well, it's like part of. It's not fair that I use random stuff that you said to me while we were walking. But, you said the comedy is an intrinsic part of the novel. It's part of what you're doing when you write a novel. It's not like an option, but the satirical comic element. So the fact that you find comedy in this man's frustration and in the limited, like, ideological options that are left for him, it's dark comedy, but the comedy makes it a little bit hopeful, no?
It's, yeah, one thing that I've always liked novels that are funny, not like funny haha like silly guy stuff, but like actually funny. I did an event with Brandon Taylor recently in New York, and he said that someone asked about humor in fiction, and he said something like, in fiction, humor is a system of intelligence, which I liked, which is that like the humor is kind of like in the world, in the sort of intellectual world of the novel or something like that. And then Mikhail Bakhtin, who I was influenced by, the Russian critic, has this great essay called Epic in the Novel, I think is what it's called. And in it, he kind of writes about the emergence of the novel as being fundamentally like it emerges, he says, along with the satire, that they're basically inextricable. And so I think
Don Quixote is full of laughs and it's considered the first novel, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And there's this way in which, and in part, it's partly because the novel is structured. There's a sort of ironic structure to it, which is that unlike the poem or the epic or something where it's just a speaker directly to the audience, the novelist's relationship is a little bit different with, it's not the narrator. He's not the protagonist. It's sort of like triangulated interestingly. And often novels like ironize other genres or satirize other genres. They're, they're connected in that way. So there's all this kind of like, different stuff going on. But I mean, to the point about, I love Notes from Underground, and I actually, maybe I've talked about this before and somewhere, but maybe not here. I don't think we talked about it last podcast, but like I went back to undergrad as an adult and took this great class called, I think it was just called The Modern Novel or something. It was like, and we just read a bunch of modernist novels. And it was my first time reading Notes from Underground. And we get to class and like, I was older than the rest of the students in the class, always quiet, you know what I mean? Sort of had this strange relationship with school. And the one time, so we read Notes from Underground, and the professor starts class. And he's like, who could relate with this character? And I raised my hand, and I was the only one that raised.
You're
my
the only
hand.
one, yeah.
And he was like, well, I hope no one does. And he like hadn't seen that I had already raised my hand, that
is the biggest lie. I can't believe a professor would say that, because what's the point of reading novels if you don't see part of yourself? I mean, I guess that's one. I mean, there are characters. I should correct myself. There are characters I don't see myself in, but
sure.
You want to explore the nasty parts of humanity, even your own humanity, when you're reading. No?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's right. I think, there's also like, I watched King of Comedy for the first time a few months ago, which I
Also
think is sort of in this,
Scorsese, yeah.
right, in this tradition. Um, um, Hunger by Newt Hampson, not quite, but similar enough. And, but the thing that, there's a couple of things that interest me about it. Like, one is sort of like you're saying, there's this there are these different ideologies that the protagonist is sort of rubbing up against, and he's frustrated. And I think part of the frustration of the underground man is that he is surrounded by what are basically rationalist or idealistic ideologies that think that the person is fundamentally either rational or good. And or like, maybe in the case of Nietzschean, something like that, strong or vital, or, strong, that there's some sort of quality of a person, that is rational and good. And I think that, sort of novels like that, and the Gothic novel too, which this is sort of a Gothic novel, it sort of tries to sort of poke at the irrationality of people. I think that people are basically irrational, and reason is a part of it, and stuff like that. But one of the things that is so frustrating is, you say, well, people are rational and they're infinitely malleable, and we're going to achieve this goodness and so on. And it's like, especially in a university setting, it's really easy to look around and be like, actually, you guys are totally delusional. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're saying all this great stuff about, equality and kindness and all this kind of thing, but you don't embody any of those things. And so I can relate a bit with the frustration there.
But there are there are other ways out besides ideology or politics in one's life. And what's
100%.
interesting is that he doesn't seem to avail himself of those other options. So, for
Right.
example, despite, I don't know if he's a good looking guy or not, but he does go to the gym a lot. So I guess he's fit or whatever, but he doesn't seem to be successful with women. There's no mention of anyone he's dating or any member of the opposite sex in his life. He sees members of the opposite sex at the gym, and he sort of gets in his head about whether or not he should make eye contact with them. And like, wait, if there's a woman who is working out and she goes to the water fountain, should he go to the water fountain next to her, or will that be creepy? I mean, so there's like really funny things like that. And he's always in his head, like wondering what the right balance is. But he doesn't seem to have, he doesn't think about his family, not much at all, really. We
Yeah.
don't really learn anything about his parents or his siblings. He doesn't seem to really be into sex, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Women are abstractions to him in a way that where physical attraction, oddly enough, just doesn't seem to come into it with him. He comments on like whether one of his colleagues is like pretty, but he never seems to go beyond that. And if someone's in their head all the time, you might think that they're like, they have fantasies or whatever. There aren't really fantasies of that sort. He doesn't seem to be into drugs or alcohol, so he doesn't have those outlets or escapes either. So it's just interesting to me that even if you don't have faith in the ideologies that are around you, whether they are liberal or right-wing ideologies, what people often do is they find escapes, but he doesn't really have them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, one of the things that I I appreciate the perceptive reading. Unlike in Notes from Underground, where there's the sort of the good prostitute that he falls in love with, or at the end of Crime and Punishment, which is another novel that I was sort of modeling on a little. He just like has this sort of come to Jesus moment, basically, where he sort of falls at the feet of, I can't remember her name, and it's like I think that generally speaking, we're in this scenario. You see, I'm sure you see as a journalist, you see these things that come out where they're like, people are having less sex than ever. Maybe not than ever, but it's certainly on the decline. People are
Sex
drinking
recession.
less. Yeah, there's people are drinking less. And And I do think that it's increasingly the case that people are walking around in a state of near constant frustration with very little outlet. And maybe they find that outlet on like, freaking out on Twitter, or like in sort of gossip or a video game. I mean, they're very lonely and very isolated. And I don't know. I didn't want there to be in this, not like, for me,
Well, his outlet is weights, is not
his
porn. It's not politics.
outlet,
It's weights.
right. His outlet is weights. And, it's an open question as to whether or not it really works, and it's an open question, by the way, as to whether or not a lot of those other things work. Sex,
Well, I think right.
yeah, whatever. Like,
Well, I
mean,
think
they don't really seem to work. If I mean, that's why they're escapes,
right?
Because they're not
yeah.
actually satisfying what needs to be satisfied. And one might say that the only thing that can actually fill the void is God.
Yeah. Well, and
spirituality or religion. I mean, it's interesting. He doesn't seem to think about religion or have a religion.
Well, yeah, the only Christian colleague that he has, he sort of looks down on her, right? He likes, what's her name? Diantha? How do you pronounce her name?
Dianth.
He likes her, but he says her only flaw is that she's a Christian. But and that means that she's weak in some sense. But I think what's interesting though is that you chose weightlifting, not politics or sex or whatever else, as an outlet for your character's frustration.
Yeah.
And weightlifting is really interesting because there's sort of double valence to it. There's an ambiguity to it, right? On the one hand, it does get you out of yourself, and it does make you focused on other things, some even noble things like strength, like beauty, discipline, right? There's a weird not weird, but I shouldn't say weird, like a good community in the gym.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of beautiful passages in your novel about just like the different like habits and thoughts of the weightlifter. And it's really interesting. On the other hand, it doesn't get him very far beyond himself, because he still entertains this idea of strength and self-sovereignty as the highest ideal, and it doesn't actually help his resentment, right? So if part of like Nietzsche's ideology or Nietzsche's philosophy is to overcome resentment, right? You guys, we'll put in the show notes if you can read some Nietzsche, but like the idea is modern men is weak because, and modern women too, they're weak because they're fundamentally structured around resentment. And Nietzsche thinks that Christianity and Judaism and socialism and everything really are different forms of resentment. And what we need is a sort of sovereign individual. And the muscle man, the main character of the book, is overwhelmed with resentments against his coworkers, he's angry at himself for being stuck in his career, all this stuff. And but
Santi, he doesn't resent people in the gym. He has respect for people in the gym.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. In the gym, he overcomes this, but it's not. It doesn't change his fundamental view of the world. It's an escape, like you said before, Shadi. It's like it's an escape that looks like it's something more than an escape. And I guess it does. And it's not because there's a problem with weightlifting per se. But there's a problem when weightlifting has to carry the whole burden of your spiritual anguish. Maybe that's the problem.
I think that I've had I've had this experience like over and over again, and I have to relearn it constantly in my own life, which is that, you're beset by certain problems, whether they're mental, spiritual, physical, or relational, and then you find something that sort of helps them. And actually maybe even really helps them for a period of time. It can be like some escape, like, I don't know, drugs or sex or, I don't know, fantasy or the internet or, whatever, video game, whatever it is. Or it can be something like, probably something that like seems healthier, like weightlifting or diet or health or, these kinds of, or I don't know, reading philosophy, any of these things, and for a minute, like it works. It's like, wow, like I'm taken out of myself a little. I'm feeling a little better. My depression and anxiety is kind of lifted to some extent, even if it's just for a little while. And so the mistake is always in thinking of these things as ultimate ends. which is for whatever reason what I'm wired to do and what I think a lot of people are wired to do, which is like, this is the thing that's like, this is the answer. I've arrived. And and then suddenly, maybe they still work a little, maybe they stop working, maybe there's new problems. But you're right about the sort of spiritual burden of life just being I don't know, immense. You know what I mean? Like it's like life is really hard
yeah. But I think part of what was beautiful about this book though is that you do. I mean, the guy is kind of a jerk. Or sometimes he seems kind of a jerk. He seems like not a fun guy to work with. Let's put it that way. But you have a fundamental sympathy for him. There's a sort of love in the book, and if it was just like a sort of condemnation of this guy, who would want to read that? But just like the Underground Man is a creep, but. By
the way, I don't relate with that guy at all. I don't know.
I know. Why do you put the creep in a picture frame? Because there's something of dignity in this person, and you want to explore his play. And I think this is a problem that we have, just like culturally and politically. Like, people need to, like, when we describe social problems, like frustrated men or whatever. We should do it with a fundamental sympathy for their humanity and not just with like a sort of moral condemnation. And that's the only way to fight, I think, the sort of Nietzschean ideology, which is spreading everywhere, sadly.
I do want to challenge something both of you guys have gestured at. It's more of a devil's advocate thing, because I do think life is hard. But I wonder, but then there are some moments where I'm like, are we overcomplicating things a little bit? Is life really that bad or difficult or challenging?
Yeah.
That, I mean, we live.
It is.
What? Sorry, Jordan?
I said, yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would love to hear more about why you feel so strongly about that. Because at some level, a lot of these underground men, they're in America, if we're talking about this context here politically. And so they are living relatively comfortable lives compared to the medieval peasants of 4 or 5 centuries ago. They do have a basic level of material sustenance. They're not starving or anything. They live in relative peace and security. They're not in Gaza, for example. They're not living in a war zone. Although obviously it can feel like a war zone, but we should also be careful not to imply that the U.S. is engaged in some kind of battle. It isn't. It's, our politics are tough, but most of us are still pretty safe, and able to express ourselves freely. Again, the vast majority of us. How do you think about this, Jordan? How bad, like, why is it so bad? And obviously I can sort of anticipate that your answer is going to be that we're talking about the metaphysical reality. We can be fine materially, but if we're not fine spiritually, then that can still be an awful existence. But I do want to push you a little bit, and actually you too, Santi. Like, we're sort of taking for granted that modern life is awful.
I don't think that I'm saying that. I just think that I don't think like modern life is awful and the past was great or something like that, I think it's just hard. I mean, it's true that we have a level of prosperity. It's also true that nobody cares. It's like it's like if it helps to just have more money and have more stuff and even have like better healthcare and like all of that, then the people with the most would be happy, or people like a lot would be like, it just doesn't work that way. Like, people immediately adjust to their level of comfort and they're totally ungrateful. I mean, I think that like the definition of the person could be like he who is ungrateful. I think that that's like. And so like part of it, yeah, it is part of it a perspective problem, which is that like, it's super easy to be ungrateful. We have a lot to be grateful for sure. You know what I mean? That is all true. In some ways life is better now. In some ways life is worse now. I mean, that's always
the case.
Yeah, it's always the case. But I do think that, like, for me, and again, like, and you can argue, is it better politically now? Or we, like you're saying, we can speak freely, and we can, do X, Y, and Z. I can, I can just, like, pull out my phone and, like, order a hamburger to my house, and, like, a little servant will bring it to me. You know what I'm saying? That's, I live like a king compared, people always say that. They're always like, you have access to things kings 100 years ago didn't even have access to. And it's like, that's fine. But, anyway, I was just
But
thinking, yeah,
can I answer that question too?
Yeah.
Though? Like, because I think it would be wrong to make Jordan's novel about modern life per se. I didn't see like this, like, oh, this is a novel of modern man. I think this is a novel of contemporary man. Just like the Notes from Underground was a novel of 19th century Russian man, and Taxi Driver was of, like, Vietnam vet from the 70s man, right? The what's perennial is um, the difficulty that the protagonists have in finding a role that satisfies, that gives them the recognition of their dignity, that makes them feel productive, that makes them feel like they're part of a greater whole. And it's no coincidence that all three of the characters that I just mentioned, of the three works of art that I just mentioned, are they're not married, they don't seem to have that many friends. And you can say, okay, this is a problem of capitalism, right? And of course, as you pointed out, Shadi, capitalism has brought us a lot of prosperity. The hockey stick graph, in Washington, D.C., we must all worship the hockey stick graph that shows that.
Wait, just say what that
is the
is.
hockey stick
The
graph?
GDP growth since the late 1700s, because of the Industrial Revolution and all that stuff, it's made the West wealthy, and other parts as well of the world. And I don't disagree with that. It's material reality. We have gotten richer. Has it been distributed equally? Well, probably not. But you could say, though, that under that condition of capitalism, where markets determine like where people work, and that things are constantly shifting, and they're shifting ever more quickly, then a lot of people will fall through the cracks and become frustrated. And the guy in your book has one of the least sympathetic jobs in America today, which is the low-level professor, because to a working class person, rightfully so, he looks like he has a lot going for him. He does have comfort, he does have higher salary, but on the other hand, he's in a very huh?
I said sometimes.
High-ish. That's true. I doubled my salary with an entry-level position in a large corporation, and before I had been an assistant professor, or visiting assistant professor. Sorry, I literally doubled my salary overnight. But anyway,
also, like, you're in debt, and not only that, you're part of the. I thought about this the other day. I'm like, why? Not only that, but also like, let's say you're you lose a lot of other things too. Let's say if you go to undergrad, you might move for undergrad. You might move then again for grad school. You maybe will even go get a PhD and have to move again. And so you're structurally sort of like bopping around and unable to form like actual communities and relationships and friendships. And, you're learning all this stuff that makes you kind of unable to suddenly talk to your parents. You're learning how bad people they are and all this kind of stuff. And no, but like, but then suddenly you find yourself, in massive amounts of debt, in a place with no friends, no community, no connection, making barely any money, teaching a bunch of classes to people that don't care. And like, this is a horrible situation. And I have a lot of sympathy for that, because a lot of people are like just following the rules. They're like, their parents are like, you have to go.
They're following what they thought was a path towards a role in society, but which leads to nowhere.
And what was a path before, and I think there are a bunch of different reasons, so why it no longer is. But like, it's a rough situation.
Yeah, but to your point though, Shadi, I do think that, okay, in pre-industrial society where everyone was born into a role, and there was a lot less social mobility, could you still feel this kind of alienation that we see in Jordan's book? I think so. It would just take a very different form. It's a very different world. But there is just
Well,
something universal though about the anguish that this character feels. I don't know, sorry.
and I'm actually not sure. Like, I mean, so the resentment, the sort of proper resentment
Oh,
proper
you say it in
resentment
French.
philosoph
Say it in
resentment with a
French.
fedora. Yeah. Is I think starts with Kierkegaard in his book The Present Age. And one of the interesting things I always think about this is that, and then it's developed by Nietzsche and Max Scheler and all these people, but like one of the things that I think about a lot is obviously there's a lot of good material that has come from the kinds of things that we're talking about. But something else has happened, which is that Kierkegaard, and I think it's the first example in The Present Age when he's talking about resentment, which, by the way, for people, resentment is sort of like a sort of worldview that's then born out of like, maybe I'm incompetent, maybe I'm envious, maybe this and that, and I'm impotent. I can't take my anger out on the person who's the cause. I sort of fester in resentment, scapegoat other people, and construct a kind of labyrinthine worldview, born out of that. And so for Nietzsche, like that's what Christianity is. It's the slave kind of constructing this worldview.
Yeah, he thinks that Judaism and Christianity were born out of the resentment of the slave against the nobleman.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. But Kierkegaard, the thing that he writes about, I think very compellingly in The Present Age, which is like a scarily prescient book. It's like 100 pages. People should read it for sure. But the thing that he says is, in the past, people would look at the king, they would make fun of the king, but they would know that the king is the king and that they're not the king. And, or he uses also the example of a father and a son. The son might lash out at his dad in anger. The dad might sort of sternly discipline the son, and they might be even mad at each other or even hate each other, but they would still be a father and they'd be a son, and there'd be like these roles that they're in. And now he says, instead of these relationships like father, son, subject, king, what you have are what he calls tensions. And so, and this is partly because we're like confused about who we are. Like I've talked to people, and they're like, we can't let these people rule over us. We have to take the power. And it's like just some guy. And it's like, dude, you're not a politician. You're not in Congress. You're not a politician. And like in a weird way, like I think me knowing this is not like, don't take this the wrong way, but me knowing my place, I'm not the president. I'm not going to become the president. I'm not going to respond to the president and say F you on Twitter or something like that, because I don't envy that power. I'm not wanting that power. I don't I don't sort of mistake myself as being in competition for that. And so there's a way in which the flattening that occurs like in capitalism or with the market logic, or that sort of opens up all these possibilities. The flattening also sort of levels these relationships, and what we have then are tensions. People can't even say a wife and husband, and they can. I just mean like it's hard for people. Yeah. I'm saying it's hard for people to conceptualize of themselves as being in particular roles in relationship to other people.
It's the wanting that's the problem, the striving for things that we want to have but don't. And I think there is an argument to be made that the medieval peasant was actually happier. That doesn't mean we would want to hearken back to that, and because now we know what we know, we can't go back. We have too much awareness. But
yeah, I'm not.
But is the problem, Shadi, that people want a role, or is it that they don't have a role? Like that they want a community, or is it that they don't have a community? Like I could imagine like destroying those desires inside of me.
It's very hard to do that. It's very hard to destroy one's desires once they're.
But I can't believe that that's like. But that's not the path forward. Is not to tell people, hey, you should stop desiring.
Well, I mean, it could. I mean, it could be. I mean, there is that that trite saying, happiness isn't having what you want; it's wanting what you have. Or if you're not with the one you love the one you're with. That's a song, I believe. But in the pre-modern era, you weren't like the idea of being with the one you love wasn't even really a live option. That's not the way people viewed marriage for the most part.
Well, okay, but part of the thing is that you had at least you were always part of a greater organism.
Exactly,
so
because
the
individual's desires
was
were
satisfied.
not. Yeah, the individual's desires were not paramount. The individual was embedded and he or
But the-
she had a role as
but the
part of
desire-
the broader collective.
But the desire for community, for belonging that you have in every human being in every era was automatically satisfied for the peasant in a way that
Exactly,
is
which
not-
it isn't now.
Right. So the answer can't just be telling the person now, hey, those desires, you should get rid of them. It has to be, let's find a way to make a society that's more human and that can satisfy those desires. Like the muscle man needs a better, I mean, he shouldn't be blaming the world for his problems. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, the reason why the muscle man's frustrated is because people are have left him alone. But I'm just saying that the book poses a political question, not just a personal question.
That's it for part 1, dear listeners. There's a lot more where that came from. If you're not yet a paying subscriber, please head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and become one. Help support our work. Hope to see you in the bonus.